Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the ninth installment of Recovery Boot Camps and the Schnellenberger Family Foundation Basic Training Family Edition. It's weird. We've been here for 8 weeks, 2 months we've been together so far, and it's kind of exciting because we are just about to get into the real meat of this whole thing. As always, feedback. Ooh, I like that. As always, let me express my gratitude again for the Schnellenberger Family Foundation. And this time I'd like to include all the staff here at Recovery Boot Camp, as well as the clients themselves. You know, it's interesting because they're really the ones who inspired this idea and drove the need for this program. You know, we are blessed to be able to witness the development and transformation of the spirit of all the clients that come here. And what we really, as part of this, is we wanted you to be able to be informed about it as well, so that you yourself, right, could do that too. And so this gave us pause, right, to think about how we could give you the same gift, because really the beauty of working in this field is the ability to really watch those people transform, to become spiritual in nature, to have these changes. And we can do it through the context of our own experience plus our professional understanding. And besides giving you the ability to have your own boundaries and not become enmeshed and really know about the disease, it also gives you the capacity to watch for the subtle changes and the differences in your loved one as they occur. So thanks again to everyone involved, you, Recovery Boot Camp, the Schnellenberger Foundation, as well as the clients and the staff here. So as is always my pleasure, I would like to introduce my friend and colleague and my amazing executive producer, Dave, so that he could start to give you some housekeeping stuff and some more tech info. All right, and here's Dave. Yay, clap, clap.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Trying to keep this as brief as possible because I'm really excited to hear what Mark has to say tonight. So just a couple bits of legalese, for lack of a better term. If anyone is here for the first time, welcome. You're going to see some things on the right side of your screen. There's going to be a box or a little icon where you can click on it and you'll be able to ask questions. So we encourage that. So if you could type out your question, it'll come to me. If it's something about not being able to see Mark or hear Mark, or you can't figure out how to download the handouts, I'll be able to answer you in real time. If it's a question for Mark that you want him to answer, we do our Q&A at the end of each session. So if it's a question for Mark, I may not reply right away because I'm going to try and ask the question live for you at the end of the session. But we encourage the questions, and you got to get them in before the webinar ends. So if something comes up, ask me. Also tonight we have a good bit of poll questions. I think we have 6, right? Mm-hmm. So you're going to see some yes or no questions come up on your phone, on your tablet, on your computer, whatever it is you're watching this on. If you can, answer as quickly as possible. All the questions are yes or no. They're completely anonymous, so you shouldn't have to feel concerned about someone seeing your answer. That's not going to happen. But the quicker you guys can answer, the quicker Mark can talk about the results. So there's going to be a good bit of poll questions, so just be prepared. And lastly, I am going to put some information in the chat box on the right sides of your screens or on your phone somewhere. I'm not really sure. You're going to see a little chat bubble. And in there, I'm going to post our Director of Admissions, Nick Johnson's information, his phone number, his email address. If you guys have a loved one that's struggling or somebody needs help, he's a great resource, a great person to talk to, either about coming down to our facility or at least giving you some suggestions on how to handle getting someone help in your area. So his name, number, and email address are going to be on there, as well as a link for you guys to download or just stream, watch any previous webinar sessions. They're all available on our website. So if you guys have missed any of these and want to go back and catch up, we encourage that. So I'll put the link in the chat box for you guys to watch as well. But that's all I got. So I'll give you back to Mark. Thank you guys. Enjoy it.
Thanks, Dave. Dave's awesome. Okay, so first of all, tomorrow I'm super excited because we begin our family weekend, which is the Basic Training Family Edition Family Weekend. And it's really all the family members, the parents of all the active clients. The foundation, the Coaches Foundation, brings them down, puts them up, And we have this opportunity to really integrate what we're doing here with personal interactive work, as well as dynamic building between the client themselves and their family. So we are super excited. It's going to start tomorrow night at 6 p.m. with a meet and greet, so I get a little what's that? Flesh pressing time. I go, whatever, handshakey stuff. And that's going to be awesome. And really, we really look forward to it, because it's really the thing that we're hoping for, a wonderful, therapeutic, enlightening weekend with some stressors, because stressors always cause tension, and tension is really it's the arbiter of all growth, right? Nobody changes when things are good. You only change when there's tension involved, right? The tension of the conflict is the springboard that allows you to grow to a higher level. So tomorrow night, 6 p.m., I'm super stoked and very, very excited about it. So, and that again is completely based on the generosity and benefit of the Schnellenberger Family Foundation, and the coach and his ability to understand the necessity for this, being a family member himself. So let's look where we left off last week. Last week, as you can see on the board, we're on slide 83. Last week, we finished on 82, which was the second to the last slide of the science of surrender, right? And so we're going to close with this slide, which is really the other side. We talked about all the diminishments and the work, and this slide is going to end up on an up note, hopefully. And there's going to be 2 more slides, but these are not actually informative slides. They're just reading slides, because there's something that we like to do, and it's really a part of AA, but here specifically at Recovery Boot Camp, we're very, very cognizant of the fact that the work is hard, the depression is real, the struggle is factual. So where are the promises, where are the benefits, and how do we keep scoring track of those? We bring that to the forefront with the reading of 2 specific things that we favor. One is the 9-step promises, and the second is the 10-step promises. And that's how we'll close out the end of this particular section. And then we get into the real deal. What we're then going to embark upon is this idea of how we're going to cover an entire section. We'd like to get through it this week, but you know me, I'm loquacious, so it may not happen. But what we're going to talk about is specifically the patient's journey through recovery, and how the corresponding awarenesses of the family and their own recovery simultaneously, concurrently, allows you to actually have a yardstick or a measuring stick by which not only to see the subtle progressive changes in your loved one, but also recognize them in yourself. Again, we're kind of big on scorecards here, because what we believe is that the information is solid, it's practical, it's proven, the theories are no longer hypothetical. However, the work can be done, and without the ability to understand the nature and have, in fact, some expectation about what could happen, many times the changes, being as subtle as they are, because they're humanistic and spiritual, that without that ability to recognize what should happen, a lot of times you can feel that nothing has. And we know that's not true, because the change is inherently incremental all the time. In fact, in the big book, it says friends of the newcomer are aware of the changes long before they are themselves. But then it goes on to say he finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life, and that such a change could hardly have been brought about by himself alone. It's actually in Appendix 2 of the Big Book, and it's the second most fulfilling definition of the spiritual experience vis-a-vis the educational variety. So let's get on with it, because remember that our goal right now is to teach you, to train you to become a lay person who in essence is their own treatment professional, with the same grasp of knowledge that we would have. Maybe in a little bit lower level and not quite as in depth, but enough for you to be able to make judgments that are not preconceived and not judgmental, understand the growth, the arc of and the continuum of recovery, gauge your own change and the change of your loved one. That's our goal, because in doing that, you can form your own boundaries specific to the circumstance of your family dynamic. You can diminish enmeshment, and you can help to set proper boundaries so you don't enable your friends and your families, and you become unified in your understanding of the disease and your addressment of it in the identified patient. So let's go ahead and move on to this particular slide. Excuse me. So the first slide that we're closing with, the end of the signs of surrender, is all about optimism. The best sign of surrender and the progress of someone that is attaining recovery in a long-term manner is a sense of optimism, right? And that optimism is highlighted in the big book in both the promises of the 9th step, which is the time where we make amends and fix the things we've broken, and the 10th step, which is the pathology of daily, what did I do? Nothing. The 10th step is continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admit it. It's the vigilance and the pragmatism of understanding where you slide in humanity, how you want to be better, but also living in your strengths and gifts. And those are really on page 83 and 84 in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. However, being that we are alcoholic, as is most of the people that we see, what we notice is that the hope has to be, in fact, realistic, because we are prone to fantasy and delusion. It's one of our biggest problems. I like getting high because it allows me to escape the confines of reality and live in this kind of, I don't know, technicolor sort of land. So I have to really be practical about my hope. And that is by understanding what causes my disturbances. And let me give you a quote that's from Bill Wilson. It was written about 23 years after he got sober. It's in a book called Language of the Heart. It's actually a letter that he wrote to someone who was struggling with depression, even in recovery. And he talks about the real core issue. Remember, originally, a few slides back, we talked about what is the cause of alcoholism. And the 12 and 12 states that what it is it's our inability to have a true partnership with another human being, right? And that those defective relationships are not the result of my alcoholism and my drug addiction, but actually its cause. So if we understand that, we have to continually refine our ability to have interpersonal relationships. And this is what Bill writes after some time sober. He says, if I examine any disturbance that I have, great or small, I find at its core an unhealthy dependency and its consequent unhealthy demand. I run into problems and my hope gets shattered a lot of times because what occurs is that I have these dependencies, right? So this is the single factor that crushes my realistic hope and crushes my idea of joy. Because what occurs is that I expect you to be able to read my mind and give me what I want without telling you, to the point where I depend on that to feel a certain sort of way, to feel a sense of accomplishment, to feel a sense of humanity, to feel all these things, right? And so I rely on that. You know, I want prestige and a attaboy and all that great stuff from you. But because I don't communicate those things, right? I have an expectation that you'll give it to me, but I don't tell you. And when you don't give it to me naturally, I start to demand it, either through manipulation or threat. And what occurs in that is it causes the relationship to become divergent. It separates it even further. So if I'm honest about it, and I look at my hope and my sense of optimism for the future, it has to be based on the curbing of these dependencies that I have and the expectations and demands that follow automatically. So let's move on to the promises to close out this section, and I'm going to read them to you. So we'll put them all up on the board in one time. So it says, I got my special big book here, custom made for me with a leather binding, and it's really important because it's huge, big print, which I need. So on page 83, the 9th step promises. It says, if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see that how our experience can benefit others. The feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. Our whole self-seeking, We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows, and our self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. And we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. This is the sense of optimism and hope that we want to experience and instill in the clients at Recovery Boot Camp, that the work does bear fruit. It is fructifying rain that waters the soil of the heart, and experience and adulthood and maturity grows. And then, oops, I went the wrong way. And then we have the 10-step promises, which are also a deep realization. And these are at the bottom of page 84. It says, we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor, and if tempted, we recoil as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given to us with no thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That is the miracle of it. We are not fighting, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. And this is how we react as long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. And I know it sounds like it's the cure for alcoholism, but my problem is not drinking and drugging. That was my organic solution. My problem is my existential pain of feeling uncomfortable in my skin. It is that hopeless feeling, right? Incomprehensible demoralization, where I have recovered from a state of hopeless mind and hopeless body. All right, let's close out that section and let's move on. I made a boo-boo. I forgot a poll question. That one's on me. We can't go back because you guys will already know the answer. So I'm going to be very vigilant for the next one. So we're going to talk about recovery as a process. And what we're going to focus on is the patient's journey with the corresponding awarenesses that the family needs to have. In other words, we're going to talk about this idea of phases of care. What are the phases of care? What to expect in those phases? What are the progressive measuring sticks that we can look at? And so let's talk in a general way first about the phases of care. So the first phase of care is that kind of reticence, that coming to treatment but being afraid, and that involves us as the treatment professionals and the facility and the community and unity here being checked out by the individual. So really it's them checking us out. Phase two is when they start working on trust. They start to be inculcated with some teachings. They start to feel more comfortable. They start to feel a part of, and they really work on the trust, something that they have been repelled by for years, because every addict, remember we spoke about the victim mentality and the trauma that whether real or imagined is real. It causes us to be super protective, that we don't want to open ourselves out for risk of having our kindness or vulnerability being taken for weakness. And finally, the last phase, which is phase three, which is when they know us, and by extension themselves. And when I say us, I mean not only us as clinicians, but you're included as the us too. So if you look at this line, they are checking you out in their new recovery. They're then working on trust to rebuild their trust from you. And finally, is starting to understand the relationship that they have with you. So it's very, very similar. So let's move on and talk in depth about these phases. Phase one, checking us out. So this is really the admission stage into treatment. And it's also the admission stage for them, where they admit that they are in a place where they need help, because the client is admitting this need for treatment, right? Regardless of whether they really believe it or it's forced by circumstance or the nudge from the judge or the parents have deep boundaries and tough love them into the circumstance. They're at a place where, regardless of whether they believe in their own addiction, like deeply pathologically, they know they need that treatment even to get out from under the rock that they're hiding under, or the rock that's fallen on them. So then what happens is the client starts to accept the circumstance, and whether it's external or internal, it becomes the reality. So they're really starting to accept this need for treatment because the circumstances, in essence, and a lot of times this is what we try to do, is make those circumstances conspire to get the client into treatment despite their resistance, because it's for their best interest. All right? And that happens, and the client starts to choose treatment. So let's ask a question that I asked way back in time, probably in the first or second week, and let's put this poll question up. Do addicts or alcoholics choose to get sober? Is there a dinger on the polls now? That was awesome. Is my dinner ready?
Yeah, I think that's
Is that what it is? Is that the timer on the microwave? I totally missed the first question
That happens.
there. Got very excited.
All right. Here we go.
All right, let's hear it. Yes, 67% of you say the addict actually does choose to get sober, and 33% say no. Well, we talked about this back in the day. The addict makes a choice that's called a Hobson's choice, right? And that's a choice where you perceive that you may have a choice with multiple options, but in fact, the circumstances of the situation dictate one particular choice. So really, addicts do not in essence choose to be sober, because they can't choose something that is inherently foreign to them. But what they do choose is they choose to not have their current situation, because recovery and what it means is a foreign concept. I can't choose this from this if I only know this and don't know that. But what I can choose is not to have this if this is problematic, regardless of what's coming down the line. So in other words, they don't choose to be sober. They choose to go to treatment. They choose to get out from under that boulder. They choose to avoid the circumstance or a jail sentence or repercussions in their family. But they're choosing not to have something. And this is not bad. In fact, it is the choice that has to happen for them to enter treatment. What else goes on in phase one? Well, under checking us out, then we start to have understandings of what you're working on. The client understands what you're working on, starts to see what us as professionals are working on, and starts to have ideas, if the family is involved in their own recovery, what they're working on. And it starts with stopping the old approach to ideas, which is the self-will driven. Remember, if for the sake of this discussion, we define the word will as a choice, then self-will are choices based on self. And what I know about myself is very little at that time, because I haven't done a thorough fourth and fifth step like we do here. I haven't really done self-examination, and I still fall prey to certain delusions and denials about myself. I've been living in my persona for so long. I've been saying, don't you know who I think I am, for so long that it's don't you know who I am, because that's how I believe I am, when in actuality it's not who I am. So we stop that approach of delusional drives, of trying to make decisions based on what I think I know about myself. And we start to engage in new approaches, which means the client starts to become compliant, right? Because what we do initially here, and you hear it all the time, and here it's very thought out, and it's not just a finger shaking and a say this statement at somebody. We explain it to them. We have them explain to us the failures of their own choices of late, and we say, okay, if you find that your record of late has been abject failure from the choices you make based on self, why don't you try taking advice from somebody else who made those same bad choices and now is possibly in a position to make a good choice? It's one of the things we do. There's a lot of interaction here at Recovery Boot Camp on this level, right? And the beauty is that everyone who works here is a recovering addict and alcoholic who's active in a 12-step paradigm, which means that this is really that point of reference, that point of identification. Then the addict starts to engage in learning about the disease concept, because they're really as ill-informed as most people, even though they have a lot of empirical data about pharmacology. They really don't understand the disease model of addiction themselves the same way, a lot of you probably didn't when you first came to this lecture. So we break down the medical model for them, as we did with you. We start to talk about the community model and the neurology and the disease model, and then we open them up to the beginning of healing, which is the treatment or the recovery model. Again, while they're checking us out, we give them diagnostic criteria, right? The major diagnostic criteria. We define addiction specifically. And let me ask another poll question at this time regarding criteria and definition. Here's a good question. Is there one single overarching definitive criteria for addiction? That's a generalized criteria that pretty much stands the test across the board. I guess you could call it the rule of thumb to judge someone's addictive potential. I don't really like that because I just learned
what that is.
Yeah, what that is like a couple of years ago.
Boondock Saints.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
I like that movie. Oh, that's right, he does. So one baseline that if you can answer, you can probably make a sound judgment on whether this person is an addict or not.
I think the results are in, Mark.
Okay, let's see what you guys got. Let's see whether you believe yes or no. So 64% of you believe that there is indeed a singular type of diagnostic criteria, and you are in essence correct. And it's not really I guess you call it a medical criteria, but it is a pretty consistent criteria. And that criteria is simply this, that you cannot predict the frequency and amount of use, which happens, but more so, this is really the deep one, because that happens all the time. But understanding that this is the basis, that you continue to use despite the negative consequences and the accumulation of those negative consequences into larger and larger consequences that tend to feed on themselves. If an addict continues to use in spite the mounting problems that they have, understanding those problems and even understanding that they're a result of their use, and they still continue to use, that is the baseline judgment. Continued use despite negative consequences. Also, we teach them about the inability to cease at important moments. This is huge, right? We all have, I got to go to court, or I got to do this or something, I've got an appointment, or I got to see my kids. But what happens is, because I can't predict the frequency or the amount of my use, or even when I'm going to use, I get into a lot of problems. And I cannot, in fact, stop using in a planned modality. And this is a line from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which I love. It is that we possess a positive genius for getting tight at precisely the wrong moment. It's from page 21. I mean, that's it. I mean, all my best intentions to try and pull my shit together for whatever I had to do were abject failures because I've got that unlucky streak where I get ripped at precisely the wrong moment. And having the client understand that in terms of writing a history or understanding their own pathology is really, really important. It reinforces this idea that you continue to use despite negative consequences. Then what we continue with in phase one is we talk to them about denial, right? And you can see that you also can learn in this moment in phase one, what are your denials vis-a-vis expectations of recovery? What's supposed to happen? Remember, originally you downloaded in the very first thing, there's a test, 3 pages of tests about expectations and projections and emotional investment. And hopefully you'll do this again and really start to see a difference in the way you perceive things. So we talk about, light term. Oh yeah, we're talking about denial, right? This is the light term, that 70s hugging term. Whereas we bring them the truth, right? All of this data that you see about your experience and what you did is not about denial. It's about the fact that you are an outright mental defective. You have made yourself deficient and that you are in essence in full flight from reality. If the obvious truth is this, but you continue to not look at it and do contrary, you are in full flight from reality and you cannot in fact differentiate between true and false. Denial, don't even notice I am lying. This is the lighter version, but it's also part of the pathology. And we start to show them that they lie about random, non-important things. How you feeling? I'm good. You're not good. You're not honest about where you're at. Hey, did you see that movie? Oh yeah, we watched that last night. It was awesome. Things that mean nothing, that have no reason. Then we also start to bring the idea of delusionality, right? So what are the things that you believe in based on facts that you think you have that are knowingly not correct? That's really the basis of insanity. Unintentional lies and the belief that they're in the possession of the truth that reinforces those lies. And then we talk to them about the shattering of denial. And this occurs in the first phase of their treatment, that they can actually shatter the denial. So initially, we repeatedly work on them. Again, for you in your own recovery, how do you reinforce the truth that runs contrary to certain beliefs that you have? You do it by repeating it, seeing it, reading it. Every single one of you who is in a situation where you have a certain blind spot of denial with your family member, you should write the absolute truth on a Post-it note and stick it on your mirror. And every single time you're in the bathroom washing your hands, brushing your teeth, you look at that thing and you read it out loud and remind yourself. And through attrition, you can rub away that denial. Let's move on. Here is the next one. So what we're going to talk about now is cross addiction. And I don't mean that you have a Mr. T starter kit and carry giant crosses around. That would be weird if you did, but it would be an addiction to crosses. I mean other things. So let me ask another poll question. Are all newly sober addicts susceptible to cross addictions? Highly susceptible. Do you think that this is a general truth? Yes or no?
What's a cross addiction?
It's addiction that is different from your presenting addiction, but is quite easy to fall into.
Like gambling or something?
Well, we'll see when we open up the thing. Let's see what these guys want. Let's see. Or maybe it's crosses. Who knows? Like Mr. T, you cross it, Stars of David. He was just addicted to all kinds of symbology. And that haircut.
All right.
All right. Let's see what you guys think.
Pretty unanimous.
Awesome. Yes, 92%. Excellent. Those of you that don't believe there's a high propensity for addicts in early recovery to hyper-focus their distractions on a secondary addiction, well, it's not quite true.
Before we talk about cross addiction, I just want to interrupt and say we're getting a lot of questions tonight from parents and family members asking about other places like retreats, if I may, other than Al-Anon, where they can find some relief. So I know that you and Tim have been talking about maybe opening up what we're going to be doing in the family weekend to everybody.
Yeah,
So we're going to actually pop a question up on.
Okay, here's a question. Do I get to see the question, or do I just
You
have
do.
to answer it blindly? Well, that's an awesome question. I'd attend. I'd probably have to.
And then just maybe briefly explain
Sure.
what the plan is. Right?
Absolutely. Should I do it now or wait till
do it
they
now.
answer? Okay, so you guys can hear me. So what we're looking at doing is, we have this family weekend where we bring all this data and all this teaching, as well as interaction and the ability to process one-to-one, face-to-face with professionals from the family is hugely important. And we limit it as it is now to the active members of our program. And what we're actually considering is expanding this and making it available to people that are on this webinar, that they can come, once a month or every 6 weeks or whatever it is, or even one time. But with regularity, we're going to offer this in different places so that you can actually come to the place where you can meet us, you can feel a personal connection, we can empathize and sympathize with each other, we can share our stories, and in that you can also learn and practice techniques of the things that we learned here. And I think that's really what we're looking for.
And God willing, maybe to take it on the road.
Yeah, and take it on the road would be awesome too.
Yeah.
We're coming to your town soon, Three Ring Circus. That would be awesome. I like travel. Can we go to Ireland?
We'll see.
That'd be
They
great.
need it, so there are the responses.
Yay, 90% of you. Okay, awesome. Well, keep your fingers crossed and put prayers and positive energy into the world, and this is going to happen. We are going to make this happen because I think it's needed and it's huge. And the relief that comes from it is amazing for people that are struggling with this, because this is the least talked about, most prevalent disease that you can find. Remember, after the shooting that we remember from a few weeks back, we started the entire thing comparing, not to be comparative, but to show you the difference between gun death statistics and opiate overdose statistics, right? And remember, we said at that time, and again, not to say one is better than other, but just to make people aware of what's in the national conversation, and guns should be. But last year in 2017, 16,000 plus people died of gun violence, right? Whereas 66,000 plus died of opiate overdose between the ages of 18 and 25. So this is a hugely important thing that we need to do. So let's get it back into the idea of cross addiction. Absolutely. Early recovery people are absolutely at high risk of a substitute, just got to click on that, of a substitution of other drugs or behaviors. Other drugs, Red Bulls 5-6 times a day, all kinds of things, kratom, things that, I hear this all the time, but it's legal. I'm like, well, yes, so is alcohol, but I can't drink because I usually end up in handcuffs or paper slippers. Not so good of an idea for me. Or I end up shooting heroin, which tends to happen sometimes too. So what we're talking about is these substitutions, right? And we want to avoid them. And in order of prevalence and manifestation recently, which has changed in the last 5 to 7 years with the advent of the internet or accessibility, is the first one is porn. And porn is a legitimate addiction. It is a neurological disorder that affects the brain in a negative way because it creates a pathology where the full brain is not involved in the encounter. It sublimates the right side of the brain, which is that ethereal romantic connection, and tricks it into thinking it has it by focusing solely on the left side of the brain, which is visual stimulus based. It's linear, not creative. And so what that does is it creates a pathology of the porn that increases in frequency, severity, and weirdness to the point where it actually prevents people from having intimate sexual congress in real life. And it is so widely available and so free, and so looked at as not taboo or not addictive in pathology, that it has become the #1 crossover addiction for people in early recovery, to their own detriment. The second one is gambling. or video games. And then we find even taking healthy things can become a cross addiction, working out to excess, getting so absorbed about your image, and that's how you're going to get that validity. Remember, we ended the last section with, if I look at every problem I have, it's because of a dependency and a demand for validation, right? And so if I focus on my essence as opposed to my image, this becomes another distraction, because it can be relationships as well, not just sexual, but platonic as well. So many friends, I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to do this, where you need a social secretary. Because in reality, what we're talking about is anything to distract us from the moment at hand, from the feeling of discomfort that I have just living in my skin. And these things can either be active or they can be dormant. And we need to be very, very, very careful about those. So what do we move on to in the first phase of checking us out? We start to talk about the emotional first step, the value of the emotion on that admittance, right? In page 30 of the big book, it says that we must concede to our innermost self that we are alcoholic, and that this is the first step in recovery. It's the first step in recovery, not the first step in the steps. I started the very first step in recovery long before I ever came to recovery. It's just between that first tiny micro step and actually making the first step was 20 years of behavior, because it hammered into submission. I knew deep down in my innermost self that I was in fact alcoholic and addicted. But I just threw my hands up and said, those are the cards I've been dealt. I'm just gonna live with it. So when we do that, we learn to express our feelings as they are related to our use. And again, for you as family members, you also need to do an emotional first step. You need to understand how to express your feelings as related to the dynamic of your family and your own possible culpability and enabling and things that you could do better. The next thing that we do in this stage is we also start with domestication tasks. These are huge, simple daily tasks that can be challenging. Make your bed, pray, brush your teeth. You'd be amazed how many people eschew hygiene when they're getting high. And that habit, even though they're not, carries over because of their low self-image. They don't even bother, right? Hygiene, cleaning the house, cleaning the bathroom, making your bed, simple, simple tasks that can be brutally hard. So now I'm going to bring in another slide it's kind of a visual, and I hope you guys can see it clearly. It's this idea about, really, it's an idea about the first step, right? And so what it does is it delineates the pathology from the idea of feeling powerless into unmanageability, which is a projection outward, which seldom works, to powerlessness, which is a feeling inward, and how it goes in two stages: conceptual, which is psychological, and active, which is physical. So in the active realm, what we're talking about is this idea of having limited self-power. And what it does is it gives me a problem functioning in the larger world. And I stay that way and I feel powerless without the development of the paradigm of the steps and the work that we do here in Recovery Bootcamp, where we really encourage this. Because when I get to the point of starting to receive empowerment, power from something larger than myself, a greater system, the higher power, God, I have to receive that in order to live from my fantasy and potentiality that I have had my whole life but haven't manifested into the kinetic reality, my active reality. In other words, I live to better manageability because I'm not trying to handle everything by myself. I'm actually being empowered to deal with the world at large, not doing it on my own. Conceptually, on the other side, we talk about the things that prevent us from allowing that to happen. The fear of rejection, of not being good enough to be accepted or wanted. Creating lies to bolster that false image of rejections and not getting what I want, someone taking what I have. And this leads to the fear of being a fraud. So I create this false sense, which is overcompensation for the feelings of diminishment, which then becomes conceited. But then the truth is I start to feel fraudulent. You know, they say, fake it till you make it, act your way into right thinking. But those may be construed as being fraudulent, but they're not. Because the truth is we don't fake the actions, We do the actions. What we fake is the pretense of believing that it'll work. I pretend to be the guy that says, this'll work, this'll work, this'll work. Because what happens is it inevitably does. And all of a sudden that pretense in me believing in the efficacy of the work disappears because it works. I don't have to pretend anymore. And so if I don't get to that point, that fear of fraudulent will self-sabotage me, and I'm ultimately afraid that I'm going to get found out. And when I get found out, I'm going to be left. And this is really kind of how the first step works in reverse from the opposite end of the spectrum, looking at it from the other side of the mirror. Then we talk about a very, 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 very important part of recovery, and this is habilitation. So let me ask another poll question. Is there a primary principle that help addicts begin to heal relationships? Remember, we talked about this before and even mentioned it today, that we are alcoholic because of our inability to have true partnerships and intimate relationships. So is there a principle that is the salve or panacea to that particular problem? I was hoping we'd get into the hundreds today. Oh well. I totally want to record the Jeopardy music on my phone and just play it while we're waiting, because that would be super awesome. Be like a full studio with sound buttons and stuff. Would be perfect.
Okay, so the votes are in, and it is overwhelming.
Overwhelming. Yes. Say yes. Yes, you said yes. And you are absolutely correct. There is absolutely a single primary principle that can help to heal relationships. And that principle is what? Well, it becomes developed through the process of communal living, which happens here, where we start to live, right? And we start to sacrifice our petty needs and desires for the better of the community, because the community is the thing that in essence saves my life and bolsters me at my low times to say that I can do it because these people felt the same way. Because that is the beginning of the healing concept with the concept of unity, not uniformity. Unity. We bring our unique specialness to the group. We better the group. The group in turn saves our lives and makes us better as well. So we focus on habilitation and diminishment of petty childhood needs in order to increase the unity of the group here. At Recovery Boot Camp, we chose to have men only for this precise reason. So many men have had damaged relationships and are hyper focused on sexual relationships that they have actually lost the capacity to have intimate relationships with other men. And in the position where we can create it, where there's not even the possibility of a sexual encounter or a quid pro quo vis-a-vis some sort of, deal, that these relationships can develop. And then they can take this template of friendship and intimacy and use it to find healthy, intimate sexual relations. And then we also start to work on anger management, which is huge because the majority of alcoholics have misdirected anger. Again, a reflection to you. What are you angry about? Is it misdirected? Does it come out sideways? Do you take it out on others even without knowing it? And does it come from guilt? And does it come from shame? And does it come from grief? For the addicts, it's the loss of their drugs, their best friend. For you, it's the concept of the loss of a child. This is how your recovery mirrors exactly the process in the phases of the identified patient. And then, of course, perceived power and perceived control. The control is removed and I don't have power and I'm in a position to do this. So let me close out with the quick last slide on phase one. I believe it's the last slide, and it's about checking us out. And this is what we do. We acquire a sponsor, as should you. We start to work on steps 1, 2, and 3, as should you. And we're open to let spiritual growth begin because we want to be happy. But for those of us that struggle, sometimes initially, the best place to start is to ask yourself if you want to be happy, because that's the jumping off point. So that's the end of phase one, actually. So should we move to questions at this time,
Do
Dave?
you have a poll in there or no?
Do I have a poll in there? No,
Okay, cool.
I don't think so. No, I don't
Okay.
see one. Did you?
Yeah.
Do you have one?
No, I mean, we have one left, but it's okay. We can ask it next week.
What's
We
it
have a
on?
ton- we
On
have
what's-
a ton of questions.
On what slide is that?
I'm not sure.
Not sure.
Failure.
I don't even know either.
Okay, so let's jump into some questions.
Sounds good. Are we gonna make big picture and take this off, the thing we did last week? I don't know, you see my beautiful face? See my gesticulation? I don't know how to do it. Dave does.
There you go.
Oh, awesome.
Perfect.
Hi, everybody.
Okay, so first question regards tough love.
Ooh, always a good question.
Can you please define your vision of what tough love really is? How does tough and love go in the same sentence? How does a family member do tough love with love and not with anger and resentment, which is what often family members get stuck in, acting from total frustration?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a solid question. It's a really, really good question. So tough love is this, where you love them regardless of what they do. However, you cannot allow them to suck your love out against your will and diminish your own mental health and serenity by their behavior, where you love them regardless of their behavior, but you are not willing to allow that behavior to damage you and the rest of the family. And when you allow them to do that, then you feed it back to them and you damage them. So an example is boundaries. Absolutely. I love you. I want you to get better. I'm willing to help you get better. I'm willing to take your call when you call me and say you want to go to treatment. I am not willing to give you money when you pound at my door and yell at 2 o'clock in the morning. I am not willing to continue to pay your cell phone bill so that you can constantly go out and get high. I'm not willing to pay your car insurance because then I am personally partially responsible if, God forbid, something happens and someone gets injured or died because I facilitated your ability to drive legally. I'm not willing to do that. I'm not willing to bail you out of jail unless you want to go to treatment. And we can arrange it through a recognizance release or deferred adjudication or getting sentenced under a Marchman Act to go to treatment. Then I'm more than willing to be effective in helping you. And understand that I do this because I want to love you to life and stop loving you to death. And oddly enough, it's weird because it seems like a conditional love exchange, like a contractual agreement, but in fact, it's not. Because up until this point, you've been engaged in that give and take, which is a contractual agreement, which makes it conditional love. And you no longer have conditions on your love. You give the love freely. What you restrict is your ability or your willingness to participate in the detrimental behavior. The love flows, the actions change.
Nice.
Sound about right?
Yeah.
All right, good.
All right, so now I have a couple questions I'm going to kind of lump together.
Lumpy.
So we have someone who said they have a son who's gay
Okay.
and are curious as to whether they should be looking for a different kind of facility for their child. And that also there's a question about when you were talking about communal living and unity and forming intimate relationships with other men. What
Correct.
if someone in that facility is gay? Is that a barrier to them experiencing unity on that level?
It is not. It is not. So let's address them one at a time. The first one is about, I guess, there's gender specific treatments. So are there orientation specific treatments? There are, in fact. I have been an ally my whole life, and I've worked in many LGBT facilities as well. And it's a bit of a double-edged sword because there is a unique pathology that exists in that community where there's other issues that are brought to the table within the paradigm of the recovery, specifically what's called internalized homophobia, that even gay men and lesbian women that are out and proud and really in the thing, what we find is that they still, because of the environment of this country and old attitudes, they're hammered with a sort of self-hatred that's deep and down. From childhood, they hear, oh, you're different, you're defective, all these things, the bad words of this. So there's a true reality through what's called internalized homophobia, which has to be addressed. Any good clinician, however, is well versed in these things. Here's where there's a bit of a double-edged sword. In that desire to live in that orientation specific community, a lot of that community, unfortunately, especially in the mental health side, has this really deep kind of idea that a big part of the disease of addiction is fueled by this kind of, not the internalized homophobia, but the actual victimization of society. So in their desire to really be specific and helpful to that, a lot of times they can actually diminish the import of the presenting problem and kind of convolute it with other problems. Not to say that the other problems are any less true. It's that what we always do is triage. And this is why what we do here at Recovery Boot Camp, why we're really focused on this. Presenting problem first. Start with the most deadly thing, work your way down. And you have to really lock into the steps, lock into the self-awareness, lock into the cognitive process of recovery in order to process those deeper seated issues. When you try to bring those lower issues or deeper issues, not lower, but deeper issues to the forefront as causal for the addiction, what occurs is you start to bring those things up that causes crisis and trauma within the patient without the development of spiritual coping skills to handle them. And what we find a lot of times is that leads to relapse, to leaving AMA a lot. So there are those type of facilities. I personally have always found that especially people that are out, that are proud, that live in the world, that are different in that way, really do well I mean, this isn't a straight facility, it's a men's facility, which in essence means that it covers all of the orientation sexually. But the truth is that still gay men need to learn how to develop intimate platonic relationships with other men. Just because that tends to be their orientation sexually doesn't mean that they have to do that. And it really helps to develop unity. So really, again, it's a choice and a preference based on the person themselves, the patient themselves. However, be careful that they don't use it as an excuse to minimize the actual presenting issue. That's important.
All right. Moving on. So we have a question from a mom who has a daughter, right? Thus making her a mom. And she's an addict, and she's been to 2 rehabs.
Okay.
After 5 months clean, she relapsed and overdosed twice in 2 days, which caused her some brain issues.
Yes.
After the second rehab, and almost 6 months later, she relapsed with drinking and was kicked out of her sober living house. Okay, so now she says she needs to live with her mom until she can find another sober living facility. And mom is getting very tired of trying to fix the problem for her. Any ideas on how to, I guess, set some boundaries or what to do in this situation for someone who's been to rehab and it doesn't seem to be sticking? Okay.
Well, first of all, let's talk about why she probably relapsed. Because with 5 months clean time, the baseline of the body's metabolic rate has stabilized, which means that their tolerance to the actual effect of the drug has dropped dramatically. And because they've been out, even like Smart junkies will say, oh, I'm only going to do half as much as I used to. But because you don't really understand, it's sort of a roll of the dice random reality about the CNS rebound, the rebound of the central nervous system when you use again after a period of abstinence. The probability of overdosing is really, really high. And in fact, most relapsers overdose within the first 2 days of their relapse because of that particular effect. Now, depending on the extent of the damage, whether it's a TBI or chronic organic brain syndrome due to the overdose and lack of oxygen, and her ability to be fully functioning on her own and self-supporting vis-a-vis work and things of that nature, plays a big factor. But generally, if she was kicked out of a sober living, that means she was capable of living in one, and she was kicked out for drinking, right? And I can tell you specifically that this doesn't happen for any reason other than the person's program becomes less important than other things they're doing. I don't want to sound harsh, but you probably shouldn't let her live with you. You should do everything in your power to facilitate her finding a new sober living house. But she must remain clean. She must remain sober, or she will not be able to stay in a sober living environment, which means the onus of that responsibility has to fall on her. Granted, I understand it's a touchy subject because she does have some damage from these relapses and these ODs, but there really needs to be a firm boundary that I'm willing to help you. I'm even willing to help somewhat financially until you can generate the ability to work for yourself, but you cannot relapse, which means that if it happens again, unfortunately, I now have to withhold my support of you financially. And again, it's a direct relationship to the first question about tough love. The love flows, but are you willing to enable them to damage themselves again? That's really the thing you have to ask.
Awesome. Okay, so we're gonna run over again about 10 minutes to get some more questions in.
Because that is our way.
So here, this is a good one. I like this question. I mean, they're all good questions, but we're gonna switch gears a little bit. This question says, how important is it that the addict or alcoholic in recovery verbally participate in 12-step meetings? My son in recovery has anxiety/social anxiety. He says he mostly listens, but he does have a sponsor.
Okay, well, sharing in meetings is by no means a measuring stick for sobriety, because there are some people that share nonsense continuously who you would pray would just shut up for 5 minutes in meetings. I mean, that's real. And some people actually approach AA as some sort of bizarro open group therapy where they feel that they can come and vomit all their problems onto the group and dispel that. The truth is this, kind of rule of thumb again, is that you take your problems to your sponsor and you take that solution to the meetings, right? When you share, you can share about the problem vis-a-vis the solution that you have now participated in as directed from your sponsor. Some people do have anxiety. Some people have social anxiety. It would be interesting to know whether he thought he had social anxiety prior to getting sober, because a lot of times benzodiazepines have become a major, major party drug and really part of what is called a polysubstance history, that lots of people who have a favorite drug of preference use benzos adjunctively to kick it into a certain gear. Oddly enough, because of the way benzodiazepines operate in the system, is that they tend to have a reoccurrence of symptomology. So where they may not have had an anxiety disorder prior to using, they can have one now. What I found personally and professionally, and what we tend to see more often than not, is that much of that anxiety that comes in recovery is the anxiety over having anxiety. And with good coaching and solid sponsorship and going to meetings with the sponsor where he may encourage them to share in small amounts, initial baby steps is probably the best way to handle this. And there is no direct correlation between sharing at meetings and the strength of their program and steps. It's really all about steps. And when the steps are worked, those things fall away. The fear of being judged, the fear of being less than, the fear of being compared. they don't become important, right? We used to storm around the world going, I don't care what you think of me. But in reality, every choice we made was based on what we thought you thought of us, right? And what I thought you thought. That's how I made my choices. The truth is, and this sounds really bizarre, is that in recovery, I have really fine-tuned the attitude of not giving a shit what people think about me, because I don't judge my own identity and my own validation on what you think about me. I judge it on what I do, the results I have, and how I live. Like, would it be nice if you thought good about me? Great. If you don't, I really don't care, because I'm no longer going to dictate my behavior based on a supposition about what you may or may not think. All right. So this will change too. If he stays with his sponsor, he has a good sponsor, he has good steps. He goes to meetings with a sponsor that can help him, because there's something to be said about it. I mean, it's like being in the first day in high school. There's cliques, there's people that know each other, there's already groups that exist, and it's hard to get into that. You need, somewhat of a guide, and that's the key. So don't get crazy if you can't share in meetings just yet.
Okay. I think we may have time for 2 or 3 more, so we're gonna get right to it.
Awesome.
How about this one? Is it okay to support the addict's smoking or vaping habit while in recovery, knowing that that is better than drugs? And if so, is it realistic to expect that the addict may eventually quit their legal cross addiction?
Yeah. Well, okay. Wow. Okay. So, yeah, no, yeah, no, yeah, no. Okay. Yeah. Geez, I don't even know how to answer this. First of all, when they're in recovery and they're working, if they're in treatment, sure, maybe, because listen, it's very common, and let's be frank, it's kind of a good way to stuff emotions initially until you can learn to process them. And it's a vehement habit, and people do it. It is socially accepted. It's also legal, and it's damaging, but it's not as immediately critical for the health and life of the individual. And it is, in fact, absolutely the lesser of two evils vis-a-vis what is the presenting problem. Remember, triage again. How do we minimize risk factors? So if they are in a sober living and working, and they want to engage in that self-detrimental behavior, and they're making this on an informed basis and a choice of their own in recovery, then you should absolutely not pay for their cigarettes or their vape. Let them get a job. If they want to do it, they can do it, but you're not going to co-sign it. Again, very, very important. Now, like I said, if they are actually in primary care or in treatment and they're struggling and they're trying to get work and they're going to meetings and they're doing the right thing and trying to balance everything and they're a little short, sure, why not? It's not super enabling. If it's included in a good boundary line, it's fine. But again, if they're on their own and working, and you shouldn't give them something that they can do for themselves. That's the bottom line. That's really the basis line of enabling. Do I do things for my loved one that they can and must do for themselves? If you answer yes, that's enabling, 100%.
Okay, so what about this? My son has recently stopped smoking marijuana, but has picked up drinking more. And basically, it seems she's saying when I challenge him on this, he says, well, it's not illegal. I could be doing this or that, but now I'm just having a few beers. He's living in our home. What type of boundary can we set to help him get sober?
Sure. If you want to continue and drink, that's your choice. If you want to do it in my house, that's my choice. Bottom line. If you can afford your own beer and drink and go to games and you got a job, get an apartment, handle your own business. If it's not out of control, then you should be like any other adult and responsible for your own actions, which means you should also be responsible for paying for them. It's kind of basic. Now, it's good that he stopped weed. Weed is a horrible, terrible drug, and the weed nowadays is so strong that it actually creates a huge neurological problem. The diminishment of a cannabinoid that exists organically in the brain causes huge increase in anxiety disorders. However, alcohol is horrible, and it destroys. Legal, yes. Horrible, no. I mean, and if he wants to smoke weed, tell him to move to Colorado. Feel free. But the truth is that alcohol is just as bad. Liver damage, kidney, all kinds of stuff like Barrett's esophagus, diminishment of pyloric valve, acid problems, stomach problems, oh geez, pancreas, so many different things. And just because it's legal doesn't mean it's any less damaging or less lethal. And yeah, it's a problem. They're both problems. And basically he's substituting one drug for the other, and in his brain he's minimizing the risk, but in fact he's probably maximizing the risk. So yeah, listen, you can do what you want. You just can't do it in my house. I'm not willing to pay for it. That's the bottom line. Yeah.
Okay, so what about for someone that is unable to attend the meeting? Are they able to work the steps by themselves?
No, they are not able to work the steps by themselves for this particular reason. The brain that broke itself, the brain that broke my brain cannot fix the brain that my brain broke without another brain to give me information so that I can then fix my brain with the brain that broke my brain. You understand? If you're an alcoholic, you understand. What it is that I need someone with an objective view to reflect and mirror the work that I've done so they can see the cracks in my logic, because my brain is already faulty, which means that I'm prone to delusions and denials based on what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And I need someone with an objective point of view who's been through it to do it themselves.
What about a family member? Is that hold true for Al-Anon?
I would say that it probably holds true for Al-Anon as well. Listen, that's why the phone was invented. Actually, call your sponsor. Get a sponsor. I understand you cannot get to meetings if there's really a physical impediment. There are online meetings. There are online communities. There's an entire desk, one of the few paid positions at Alcoholics Anonymous, which is called, oh God, what's the name of the desk? I think it's called the walk-alones or the lonelies, and basically it's for people that live in remote areas that don't have the capacity to go to meetings. They're online, they're phone meetings, there's sponsorship trees where you can actually do the work. You need to have more than one set of eyes. The old adage is true. Two heads are definitely better than one. And especially when one of those heads is sober, right? Two drunken heads, but two heads are better than one, especially when someone has been through it, has done the work, and has an objective view, and has had some transformative experience that they can actually share with the person that's doing the work. Same for Al-Anon. If you can't attend meetings, get an online meeting, call Al-Anon. You can call the Al-Anon World Service or AA World Service in New York. They're full of information. They will answer any of your question at any time during the day or night, and they will help you to find the resources you need to participate in your own fellowship, even if you're stuck by yourself.
All right, I think we got time for one more.
Sure, why not?
Okay. Which one to choose?
I don't know, are they dropping off the map on the attendance level?
No.
Well, then we got time for one more. So
Okay.
maybe I'm not boring them, which is good.
Yeah, definitely not.
Definitely not.
Where's the one? Oh, here. Is it true that the addict's brain stops its development when he or she starts using? If so, how can we treat them as adults when chronologically that may be true,
Okay.
but their behaviors are that of an adolescent?
It's a solid, good question. And I'm going to say their brain does not stop developing, because then they would be incapable of all kinds of things like, I don't know, driving, any kind of even slightly advanced math, balancing a checkbook, all those kind of things. It does become diminished, and it definitely gets retarded, literally slow to grow in certain areas of development. So really we find these areas of the retardation in that development, specifically for the addict and alcoholic, occurs in the emotional areas, right? And we see that with Erickson and Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the expanding of consciousness, developing peer groups, a lot of psychological stuff that's written about it. But what we know is that emotionally, they tend to slow down intensely, even looking as though their emotional development has come to a grinding halt. Now, here's the beauty. They may have started smoking weed and getting high when they were 13 and got sober when they were 23. So initially you're like, well, how do I treat them like an adult at 23 when they're intellectually and emotionally a 13-year-old? Well, intellectually they're not, but emotionally they may be. That's why a lot of times having multiple hands in the pot, treatment professionals, counselors, things of that nature is very, very effective. However, here's the beauty. It's not going to take them 10 years to catch up to being 23 years of age. The whole process of the steps is the development of self-awareness and emotional maturity, emotional development, and emotional sobriety. That thing that I read you from Bill that talks about the core problems actually came from a letter he wrote that's called Emotional Sobriety, the Last Frontier. So you could rapidly, through the techniques of the 12-step, through the techniques of good therapy, through the techniques of psychospiritual development, all of which are the focus of the program here at Recovery Bootcamp, you can actually increase the speed and efficacy of that growth pattern in a very, very steep angle. So within a year, 6 months, 9 months, year and a half, you can actually regain all that emotional development that you lagged on prior. Initially, you have to understand that they are emotionally a 13, which means they're probably prone to tantrums. So you don't treat them like a child, but emotionally, you treat them like an emotional child. You still have expectations that they behave as a mature adult, but you're not going to co-sign their tantrums, basically. Yeah.
I think that's a good one to end on.
No emotional tantrums. Yay. All right. So let me just once again say thank you all for attending. I'm so glad that you've come. And really what we desire here at RBC, right, is that we want to be able to give you the same kind of love, albeit sometimes tough, the same kind of knowledge and the same kind of teaching and help that we give to our clients here. We walk them through everything. We don't baby them and we don't abandon them, but we basically help them to do the work for themselves, to have a sense of accomplishment. And that's what I want to do for you. That's my hope, is to get you into the same place. So here at Recovery Bootcamp and from the Schnellenberger Family and Foundation, we thank you for joining us this week, and we hope to see you all next week. Until then, be nice to yourself, pray a little bit, talk positively, and remember to tell yourself in the mirror that you don't have to believe the denials that you're prone to at this time.
And say hi to Dave's mom.
Hi, Dave's mom. I almost forgot. I'm super sorry.
Hey, Mom. Thanks for watching.
Do you need to turn us off from here?